Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webcast. My name is Erica Lini. I'm the personal economics reporter at the Globe and Mail, and I will be your host and moderator today. Before we get started, I would like to acknowledge that the land on which the Globe and Mail headquarters is situated is a traditional territory of the Wendat, the Anishinaabeg, the Haudenosaunee, the Métis Nation, and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. We're grateful to have the opportunity to work and live on this land. Over the next hour, we're going to talk about financial freedom for single women. There are 7.2 million single women in Canada today, an increase of 400,000 compared to a decade ago, according to Statistics Canada. And yet, it remains hard to find financial advice for this group. So how can single women build financial resilience and wealth? That's what we're going to talk about today. The event is presented with support from Richardson Wealth. We are pleased to have a representative from Richardson Wealth on our panel today, along with other speakers who are sharing their views independently. As we go along, please type your questions into the Q&A box on your screen, and we'll get to as many as we can later on. So let me introduce the panelists. First, we have Sasha Isaacs, Senior Portfolio Manager and Wealth Advisor at Richardson Wealth. Next, we have Amal Mastri, CEO of Fix the Broken Rung. And finally, Jessica Morehouse, podcast host and author of Everything But Money, The Hidden Barriers Between You and Financial Freedom, which incidentally is also sitting here on my desk. Welcome, everyone, and thank you very much for being here. So let's jump right in. So I think when I think about today's subject, I tend to think about it in terms of like two compounding financial challenges. The first challenge is the challenge of being single in a financial and tax system that is generally geared to couples and families. And the second challenge is being a woman with all the added financial hurdles that can come with that. So let's start by talking about being single. What would you say are like the 2 or 3 top challenges of going it alone financially? And let's start with Sasha for this one, and then go to Jessica, and then Amal.
Hi. Okay, I think the biggest challenge is the obvious one. It's just budgeting. It's budgeting on one paycheck versus two. It's the inability to spread out expenses over 2 paychecks. And I think we can talk at length about how expensive things have been recently. We can talk about how expensive housing is, and I recognize that is a massive challenge for a single person. But I think the other challenge that we don't really talk about is decision fatigue. So the single person having to take the full mental and emotional load of every single financial decision they have to make. There's no partner to bounce ideas off of. There's no partner to share that burden with. I think we don't really, that's one of those challenges that we don't really talk about. Decision fatigue can be very, very impactful on long-term results for single people because you're slower to make decisions. You're second guessing yourself all the time. And worse, you could just be avoiding it in total. And that's a big, big issue. All of those things together can erode confidence, and that's going to put a real negative spin on long-term, your ability to reach your long-term goals.
Okay, and Jessica, what were your thoughts on this?
I mean, the number one thing I hear from single people, but especially single women, is just the cost of living. I think often when you are in a partnership, a couple, you forget that you have this amazing discount, sometimes 50%, because you're splitting the cost of almost everything: rent, utilities, your mortgage, groceries, getting gifts for, if you're going to a wedding, you get to split the cost of all of that. So, when you're on your own, you have to pay 100% of everything. Again, unless you have maybe an alternative kind of arrangement, you have some roommates and things like that. We can discuss that later, which I think is something that is becoming a little bit more commonplace. But in general, you have to pay everything yourself. And not only that, you are 100% responsible for your entire financial life, things that are within your control and not in your control. And when you're in a partnership, if you, for example, your hours are cut at work or you lose your job, not, because of anything due to your fault, you have some kind of an automatic backup plan in a partner who can maybe be that buffer or support you until you find your next job or you can get on TEI. When you're on your own, you have to figure out a plan immediately. There's kind of no cushion exactly. I mean, although you can save a cash cushion, of course, but there's when you have a partner, you have kind of that built-in protection that you don't get as a single person. So I also agree with the decision fatigue. It's great to have a partner where you can bounce ideas off each other, but also learn from each other. I find typically when I've worked with couples, there's always one person in that partnership that is maybe a little bit more knowledgeable or has more experience when it comes to things like budgeting and cash flow, debt repayment, investing, things like that. The other partner, not so much. And so they get to lean on that partner for that information and that support. But again, when you're on your own, you have to know all of that stuff and implement it. And it can be pretty overwhelming and stressful. So yeah, it is, there's a lot of, a lot of things single people have to deal with that I think if you're in a partnership, you may not realize these are real issues, and it's a lot.
And Amal, what do you think?
And exactly, to add on to Sasha and Jessica's point about the comfort and the risk mitigation of having two incomes, the idea of having a thought partner and someone to save that decision fatigue, someone to lean on and bounce ideas off of, I'd say that there's an even bigger emotional and psychological disadvantage too, which is the cultural scripts around being a single woman in finances. So in prepping for this panel, I Googled single women financial planning and a bunch of results popped up. Then I Googled single men financial planning, and in the first page results, there were no results whatsoever targeted at single men specifically, except for one, and it was a Reddit thread where a guy was asking a question if 24 was too young to have a wealth manager. And I do think that encapsulates the attitudes, sometimes the more gendered and conditioned attitudes towards finances and money and wealth creation, because men are taught that if you accumulate a certain amount of wealth, then everything else in your life will be taken care of. You will have the relationship you want. If you want to have that relationship, you have all the time in the world. So you may not have to plan in advance for fertility treatments or childcare or whatever else is happening, because you don't have people in your ear saying, the biological clock is ticking. And I find that men are more comfortable talking about money with each other. And then on the flip side, for single women, it's yes, you have to take care of your finances, but it's really positioned as something to worry about as a single woman being more vulnerable versus something to be really excited about. Like, look at this autonomy you have. We fought for the right for women to be single and financially independent because 50 years ago, you couldn't even open a credit card in Canada without a male cosigner. So I do find that those cultural scripts can sometimes create an attitude or a climate of fear and worry that makes it less fun and less exciting to engage in your financial planning and in money conversations.
Totally. I completely agree with that. So Amal, you sort of brought us to the second thing that I was going to ask is, so we talked about some of the challenges that can come with being financial challenges of, being single in general. But now let's talk about in terms of challenges, like what are the added challenges that you might face if you are a single female? And let's start with Jessica and go to Sasha and then Amal.
Sure. I mean, the unfortunate thing is there are a lot of challenges being a single woman and the things that you would deal with compared to, say, a single man. The obvious ones, of course, are women still earn less than men for the same work. Women live longer, about 6 years on average. And typically women are the kind of default caregivers, whether that's to children, maybe they're a single parent, Or if they have no children, caregivers to their parents, as opposed to, say, if there's other siblings in that family, but they have kids or they're male, it's usually the single women that become the default caregivers for their parents. And all those things together mean, okay, so that means I have to save a lot more money because I'm living longer, but it's going to be more difficult because I do earn less. And also, there's this potential future financial burden of trying to support my parents. So, on all kind of fronts, you are facing these really big and expensive challenges that may not be experienced by, say, a single male. And so those are some, things I think that are front of mind. And I know I'll mention briefly too, the other issue is that women do have this, biological clock in that if you want to have children and you realize, well, I may not have a partner, but I still want to become a mother. There's costs involved with that, and not just with, fertility treatments and things like that. But once you become that single parent, all the costs that you then have to pay a 100% against, you don't have a partner to split, such as, childcare and all the other enormous costs of raising a child. And so, there's a lot of things to consider, and a lot of things that I know a lot of women are concerned about because, like they said, when I look at kind of the content information, it's exciting to be a single male, the opportunities and the potential you have. But the tone of any kind of content for single women is very, you should be worried. You should be really anxious. Do you have a plan? Oh, you're all on your own. All these kinds of things. So it's very kind of negative and kind of spun as not something that you should, there's, because really there are a lot of opportunities. There's a lot of great benefits for being on your own, having that autonomy, but we certainly aren't presented that information in that way.
And Sasha, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I have a lot to say on this topic, I think. So I was really excited to talk about this today because I myself am a single woman. I was divorced and I was trying to, raise two kids, rebuild my financial life, and also navigate a career that's very dominated by men. So I had my own sort of, oh my God, it's all on me moment. And I was keenly aware of all of the challenges that single women face. Because of my work, I was really prepared to navigate that. But what happened during that process is a lot of women were talking to me about their own experiences and looking for advice from me, specifically because they knew I was going through that single experience. And what really made me kind of dive into the topic was a few things, and Jessica mentioned a few of them. So the income gap. Women make 84 cents on every dollar a man makes. That's even worse for racialized women. Then we have to deal with the motherhood penalty. So, we make less money because of that as well. We're discriminated against because of, potential motherhood. And then there's another penalty we don't talk about enough, the menopause penalty. And we see a lot of women in leadership positions just they're at their peak earning potential, exiting the workforce because they can't deal with the symptoms of, frankly, something that 50% of the population is going to experience at some point in time in their life, right? So we have all these things to deal with in terms of just our inability to make as much money as men during our lifetime. And then, as Jessica really well pointed out, we live longer on top of that. And so we have all of these challenges that we need to deal with. And lastly, there's our own biases or behaviors around money because we tend to be more conservative. So that's just another double whammy there. So we make less money, we live longer, and we typically invest a bit more conservatively. We hoard a lot more cash. And so we need to be a lot more mindful about how we're navigating our finances.
Absolutely. And I would say, when we're talking about motherhood, taking care of elderly parents, whether yours or his, and menopause, all of that like, it's not just a pay gap. That can take years, right? Earning years away from you compared to compared to men, whether you have to scale back completely and, jump out of the workforce for a while, or, just scale back and go to part-time work or what have you.
And that even impacts like how much we are contributing into CPP. Like our pensions are smaller. So it just really, really accelerates if we don't have a clear plan.
Okay. So let's talk about, you've all said sort of that, this is generally framed of, oh my goodness, you're a single woman, here's some help. But let's talk about the opportunity of being a single woman. And I can think about the pay gap. Like statistics over and over show that that's one advantage. Generally, single women face a slightly smaller pay gap compared to married women. So what do you think what do you think has the biggest financial upside for women today? Being married or being single? And let's start with Amal and go to Jessica and then Sasha.
I'm very bullish on being single. Hopefully my husband can't hear this, but there's so much opportunity in being a single woman and having that autonomy, provided that we're having the right conversations, that you're going to experts like Sasha and Jessica, and that you're finding the right support for your finances. But number one, if we look at statistics, because there's a lot of scary stories about how hard it is to be a single woman, but there's data coming out of the US that single women are leading over single men in median net worth and also in home ownership. And again, keep in mind, we've only had 50 years of having kind of parity in terms of just like our access to financial instruments, like credit cards, like I mentioned before. So already single women have really caught up in that ways. The second part of it is we often don't look at the unpaid household labor that married women often perform. So even if you take out childcare, so in a couple with no children, if it's a hetero couple with a man and a woman, the woman on average takes on 8 more hours of household work a week just by virtue of living with that man. And when we look at studies like McKinsey's Women in the Workplace, as women climb the career ladder and versus men take on less and less household work, whereas women take on more and more. So we have the pay gap working against us, and then we have the household labor on top of it. But single women have that flexibility and that opportunity. And I'd say my last point is the reality is most women, whether you get married or couple up or not, are going to be single or have to plan for being single at some point in their life. So 80% of widowed individuals in Canada are women. The divorce rate is 40%. So if we start with being single as the default for every single woman, and then you can just be happily surprised if you do end up with a partner and you can merge those finances, I do think that that is much more empowering and protects all women. So versus single women kind of being the exception, I believe that we should all be planning like single women.
That's a great point. And Jessica, do you want to take it from there?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. It's funny. I've been married for 12 years and we've been together for 18, but I do have a backup plan for if he dies. I'm always preparing for when I'm going to be that single woman, because like you said, at some point we are going to be either, divorced, widowed, whatever other situation. We're going to be single at some point. In our lives. And I think often we, again, the messaging, the tone we see with single women is, well, take care of yourself until you're in a partnership. But there's no guarantee that you will become in a partnership or you even want to. I know a lot of happy single women that love their life, that they love their freedom. And that's something that often doesn't get talked about. It's talked about for men, all the freedom of choice you have, but for women, it's never really discussed. But you have so much freedom with your finances, and there's so much data to back up. The women are excellent money managers, excellent investors, and we are really good at actually taking care of ourselves and others. And there's a lot of benefits for doing on your own. And I think often we don't really discuss some of the cons of being in a partnership. For example, you may think, oh, this is great. I'm going to have, a partner. We're going to be able to split things and grow our wealth together. Well, your partner may become coming into that relationship with a bunch of debt or a bad credit score or all these other situations that you may not expect. And now they're kind of your problem as well. When you're on your own, you just have to take care of you and figure out what your particular goals are and things like that. And that's the other component too, is often when I have worked with couples, especially when they're in that mode of deciding to move in together or get married, they are very conflicted in terms of they have very different maybe financial philosophies or different goals or different ways that they want to manage their money because, you know, prior they were single, and that can cause a lot of conflict, something that you don't have to deal with when you're just, you know, handling your own stuff. I'm always of the mind, even though I've been in a partnership for almost 20 years, that you should always have some sort of financial autonomy, because it is good for the relationship to have some freedom and to have that open communication. But again, when you're on your own, you don't have to ask for permission. You don't have to see, okay, well, I'll put my personal goal on the back burner because there's this other goal that has to take precedence. You really get to do whatever you want. And again, there's so many exciting things and positives of being on your own and doing it your way that for women especially is rarely talked about. But I think it should be discussed more because there's a lot of great things about, you know, doing your own thing and being single.
That's a great, yeah, totally agree. Sasha?
I agree with everything Amal and Jessica said. I think when I was thinking about this for myself, being single really allowed me to focus on myself and to align my goals with my personal values as opposed to compromising some of those values and goals with a partner. The thing that I dislike about the industry really is that we view singlehood as a phase in life until something happens. And I think we really need to start understanding that it's a legitimate lifestyle choice. And being single has given me a lot of opportunity in terms of how I want my career to look like, where I want to travel, where I want to live, how I want to live, what I want to spend my money on, how I want to invest. It's really allowed me to focus on myself and my own personal growth. And I think that's very powerful. I think one of the most empowering things a woman can do for herself is get a clear idea of what she has, what her balance sheet looks like, and what she wants her life to look like, what she wants her future to look like, and her retirement. And it is it's way simpler to do that when you're on your own.
Absolutely. I have to say, this idea of plan for being single no matter what really resonates with my reporting. It got me thinking about two things. First of all, I've covered enough very messy financial divorces that were always involved a woman not knowing what the household assets were, which made it so much easier. And this were all heterosexual relationships, but for the man to hide assets and deny, and it made for a much messier and more confrontational process. And the other thing it got me thinking about is widows. Canada has done such a great job of reducing poverty among seniors, but the one group that really sticks out, where we still are seeing, higher poverty rates, is widows. And that often is because these, women have spent their entire life relying on somebody else for their finances and didn't plan for after and didn't know how to handle it. And I think that's a real contributor to poverty rates among widows.
Mm-hmm.
So, you make excellent points. So we talked about upside potential. Let's talk about how do you build financial resilience as a single woman. So how should we think of it? Let's start with Sasha and then go to Jessica and then Amal.
So resilience. I think that the first thing that women really need to do, as I said before, it's really empowering to understand what your balance sheet looks like. But start off with a budget, a realistic budget. We can't. I want lots of things, but I have to live within my means. So I think we have to be really realistic. I always create a budget starting with what I need. So food, shelter, the important things that you must have. And then my next bucket is savings. I ensure that I pay myself first. I automate so I don't have to think about what the market's doing. It just goes into my retirement portfolio. And then whatever is left is my wants. That's my travel, my shoes, my, anything else that I want to spend money on. I think that order of operations is really important. Too often I see us doing needs, wants, and then whatever is left over is saved. And that is not how you build your wealth over time. The other thing that I think is important is just having a plan, a financial plan. So understand what your long-term goals are, what your short-term goals are, and have an objective plan to reach those goals. And you need to be able to manage around risks. So we get sick, we might lose our jobs. We really need to plan for those what if scenarios. I stress test my financial plan all the time to see where there are gaps. In terms of there's a lot of products out there, and a lot of us have them through work. Things like disability insurance and critical care insurance, so that if we are sick, we have to create our own safety net, right? So we have to really ensure that we have an emergency fund. We talked about that. 6 months is generally well understood to be a good emergency bucket for us to create. All too often, when I talk to women, they have a lot more than six months of cash. They really want to hoard cash. And cash is great, but inflation erodes the purchasing power of cash. So it's really, really important that we are mindful about what that safety bucket is. 6 months is a very generic number. It has to be personalized. And that's why it's really important to have a plan. 6 months might be reasonable for one person and very unreasonable for another. It is not cookie cutter. We really have to create the life that we want, figure out what our goals are, and then have a plan in place to accommodate that. And then the last thing is, don't delay. It's never going to be the perfect time. You're never going to have enough. It's never going to be just right. Start small and start as soon as possible. The investment landscape has really been democratized. It is very accessible. There's a ton of information out there. We really just have to do the work. And we have shown, women do the work. We're great investors. We don't day trade. It has been shown that we generate better returns over the long run than our male counterparts because of our attitudes towards investing. And so we really need to take that and make those behavioral traits that we have work for us.
Okay. I can't remember what I said. I said Jessica.
I mean, Sasha did such a great job of really outlining. I don't know if there's too much that I can add, but when I'm working with someone or having a discussion with someone, often when you are taking a look at what do I need to do to have that solid financial foundation, as a single person, it can feel very overwhelming because there is a lot to do and there's a lot of steps. And so I like to start kind of not talking about money at all, but talking about the goals. I know Sasha touched on this, but this is a really nice kind of soft place to kind of start. Okay, let's talk about what do you want out of life? What are your short-term, your long-term goals? And maybe you have them in your head and maybe you haven't realized that they've actually changed over time. And so let's really outline all of the different goals you can think of and then categorize them within short, midterm, long-term, and then start making some action steps, really small ones just to start, such as, okay, you don't have an RRSP, let's open that up. Or, oh, you're not participating in your workplace's pension or group RRSP, let's do that right away. So often when you do work, with a financial professional, they'll have that insight into kind of seeing what's going on and have some insight into, okay, I see that you're not doing this. This might be a blind spot for you. You may have never considered this because no one's brought it up. And so I think that's another component is it's so great to get a second pair of eyes because although, I'm a big DIYer in so many respects, I also love working with a professional so they can take a look and see what I'm not seeing because sometimes I'm just too in it. And so getting some help, whether that's just to do a kind of quick overview or to really drill down and make a very specific, tailored for you personal financial plan is something that's great. And sometimes it's an investment depending on what kind of professional we want to work with. Especially, I love working with fee-only planners. That could be an expense, but overall, you're gonna, really get an idea of exactly what you need to do to reach your particular goals. And I think the best part is you can really see, is this possible for me to reach my goals of home ownership, retiring at a certain age, all these other kind of things on my own. And they'll be able to really take a look at everything and say yes, no, or if it's a no, what do we need to change so we can make that possible? So sometimes it's about really opening up those conversations. And I think another thing, just in terms of building your overall confidence, because there is still, the data keeps on showing that women have a lack of financial confidence, not in financial skills. We've got some great skills when we utilize them, but it's this confidence. And again, that's a whole other conversation of where that stems from, but history is where it comes from, of not being, getting a seat at the table and being part of these conversations, is to start having those conversations, especially with your women friends, your women coworkers. I mean, I've always been that person that's the safe space where you can talk about money all day long, and I'll be happy to have those conversations. And it just makes it easier and less like this big burden that you have to take on alone. If you know other women are having these experiences and struggles, it makes you feel like you're sharing it, and it's not as intense, and it's something that is manageable because other people are managing it.
Yeah, those are great points. That was really comprehensive. And I'll just jump in and add maybe a step zero before we get into the goal setting and the planning and the investing. And that is to increase your income as quickly as possible in your career. So if you're curious about what the broken rung and fix the broken rung refers to, it's a first step on the career ladder where women fall off. They have lower promotion rates compared to men, and especially if you're a woman of color. And how that translates to your earnings is you earn less because you're not getting promoted as quickly. And sometimes when you're not getting promoted as quickly, your career can stagnate. The other benefit, obviously, of increasing income as fast as you can in your career is you have a longer time horizon for investing. Not a lot of women going to their careers know this. They don't realize that they're going to face this really significant barrier at the beginning of their career. They don't know what help to get for that to help them accelerate their careers. And they typically don't have the same network or aren't mentored in the same way as men are. So, for example, if you're in a company and most of the senior roles are held by men, you may not be as comfortable in building those relationships and getting that mentorship. So I think it's just really key to get the right career support to accelerate that career. I'd say the second part of that too is to really look at ways that you can diversify your income, especially, if you're 20s and 30s and you do have that extra time. A side hustle, consulting, that is something that can help you with the risk mitigation aspect of not having the two incomes. So if you potentially lose your job, you have another income stream to rely on. And it really makes your career overall more resilient because you're building that extra skill set. And the third part is, again, I'll echo this idea of building a village. So build a village of people who can advise you on your finances, other women you could talk to about money. And at the same time, get the career mentors who can guide you through things like salary negotiation. It can help you script out what to say or when to say it or what to ask for. It's so critical to get that support and to also work with people that you can relate with, that, to see yourself in those roles, or to see yourself managing money in the same way. It can be just so important to have those role models and those guides along the path.
That's really interesting. So I have a quick follow-up question there. So you've mentioned, it's often can be harder for women to get the kind of mentorship that they need because senior leadership is male dominated. So if you're in that kind of work environment, how do you find your mentors?
Proactivity is key. So we work with a lot of male senior leaders at companies, and I find so many of them are so willing to do it once they're cued of, oh, I should be mentoring more women. So what we advise the women in our accelerator is send that email, request that coffee chat, make the effort to build that relationship, and be proactive in advocating for yourself. Oftentimes they're not going to come to you, but if you go to them and you show that you're interested and that you're passionate, you are going to find your allies. And I found sometimes, especially when men kind of get the message that like you're doing something really important here in terms of equity, they can be even more invested in mentoring young women because they want to be part of the solution. A lot of men want to help women accelerate their career and level the playing field. So I'd say that that is probably the most important aspect of it.
Okay, perfect. So I think we framed resilience like really clearly along things that you can do sort of defensively to sort of make sure that you're going to be okay no matter what happens, and things that you can do sort of on the offense in terms of increasing your income, increasing your wealth. So I wanted to delve a little bit deeper into the defense first and then into the offense. So we're talking about defense. So Sasha, you mentioned emergency funds and insurance. And I thought it was really interesting that you mentioned women having a tendency perhaps to have too much of an emergency fund. So I guess like my initially I was going to ask you if single women and I think this would be like singles in general, like should they have a larger emergency fund than your typical general rule that we hear about of having like between 3 and 6 months of income of expenses set aside in an emergency fund. But be really interested to hear sort of what is a general rule that maybe makes more sense for single women that they can use as a metric to get it right, to make sure that they're going to be okay, but they're also not just hoarding cash that will be eaten up by inflation. And then I wanted to talk about insurance, and particularly you mentioned disability insurance and critical illness insurance, which can be so important for someone who is single, but at the same time can also be so very expensive. So I might let's maybe start, even though Sasha, you brought it up, let's start with Jessica and then go to Sasha, and then Amal, if you have any thoughts, please jump in.
Sure. So yeah, I thought that is interesting, but also not a surprise that a lot of women have maybe too big of an emergency fund. I was definitely guilty of that throughout my 20s when I was, single or unmarried at that time. And part of that was because I was very concerned about what happens if I, lose my job, or there's so many risks that I knew were real possibilities. And so I always wanted to make sure that I had not just enough, but more than enough. But I think, one really important thing that I realized, especially as I learned about the power of investing and how important it was for my future, was you do want to make sure you don't have too much cash because it's just sitting there, barely earning, its keep in that account where it could be doing a lot more for you if you were to invest it strategically. I think part of that is what I definitely noticed at the beginning of when I was starting to learn about personal finance, and this still exists today, depending on what kind of resources you look at. A lot of the financial content that is geared for women is focused on debt repayment, budgeting, and saving. And so often we are not discussing at length investing and how actually sometimes even more important that is for our futures and to protect ourselves over the long term. And so what do? We pay down our debt. We're really good at budgeting and living frugally, really good at saving. And then when we get to that point of like, well, we have enough, we aren't really sure what that next step is. And so again, having those conversations or just trying to get rid of this taboo that, investing is so complex, you couldn't possibly try to do it on your own, or, you have to start learning about this, when you're in your teens or whatever the case is. We need to get rid of this and start really pushing that. Actually, again, women are really excellent investors. The resources are there. We just have to make sure that they are there where women are looking for them, and having those conversations open and honestly about some of that stuff. But going a little bit into the insurance, that's something, again, doesn't often get talked about. And it could be just because it is kind of an uncomfortable conversation to have, because you're basically saying if something bad happens to you, you need to have these products. And no one wants to think that something's bad is going to happen. They don't want to think that they're going to have a critical illness or that they are going to get a disability. We all have these biases that think, well, that's going to happen to someone else. It's not going to happen to me. Unfortunately, I'm sure we can all point to someone in our personal lives that has had disability or a critical illness, and whether they had insurance or not makes it's a life changing if you don't have that financial security. And although sometimes we think, well, I think I've got enough insurance through work, is it actually enough? Because some workplaces offer you the bare minimum. And also the reality is, if you leave that workplace, whether you quit, you're fired, you're laid off, you're no longer covered. And so it's also important to look into private insurance. And also too, what often doesn't get discussed is if you're self-employed. I'm self-employed. So is my husband. And so we had to look outside and make sure that we were protected and had our own forms of insurance and making sure we had all our bases covered. And, these are things that I think as a single woman, again, you have to look into, have these discussions for, because I think they aren't talked about as much as, say, make sure you have a budget and you pay off your credit card debt and you're not spending that much money. There's a lot more elements that are probably almost more important for your financial well-being.
And Sasha?
Yeah. So, okay. So I'll just touch on the topic of insurance again. A lot of us have coverage through work, but as Jessica mentioned, others don't. I think the starting point really is to figure out what your needs, like what you need to spend money on for the next 6 months, let's say, and what kind of liquidity you have in your portfolio. The emergency fund should be highly liquid and in an account that you can easily access. You want to make sure that you're making wise decisions there. But in terms of insurance, if you kind of like figure out what that gap is, it's not difficult to top it up, right? And we have to stop thinking about insurance as a sunk cost. Really, it is our wealth preservation strategy. It's part of our wealth preservation strategy, and it's an absolute must. If we get sick, there is no one there to help us, right? The other thing that I think is really important is things like powers of attorney. And I don't think we think about that. It's another like defensive strategy, right? So there's powers of attorney for property and there's powers of attorney for our health. So who do we want? There's no partner. Who do we want stepping in to make financial decisions for us if we are in the hospital and we cannot act for ourselves? Who do we want to make health decisions for us if we can't act for ourselves? Those are pieces of our strategy that absolutely need to be covered off. We can talk about, wills. A lot of single women I know don't even bother with an estate plan. They have no will. That's super important, right? You will be generating and building wealth over your lifetime, and you want to have a plan for what happens to those assets. Because if you die without a will, it's just decided who gets your assets. You don't get to have a say in how that's dispersed. So those are the things that I think are really important. A proper emergency fund, disability insurance, critical care insurance, and having powers of attorney and a well thought out estate plan.
Okay, amazing.
I'll just jump in quickly. I want to make a really quick point on the insurance and really the psychology behind it, because a lot of times, as Jessica and Sasha mentioned, people put it off because it's highly unpleasant. And when they get it, people feel it's the sunk cost. But here's the thing. Most women I know have anxiety and are going to worry about the what ifs. What if I'm laid off? What if I get sick? What if, etc. Those worries and fears are going to happen anyway. So think of having the conversation now and paying the premium as you're buying yourself back that time, that peace of mind. You're getting better sleep at night because you're not laying awake worrying about these things.
That's an excellent point. Amal, we don't have that much time left, so I really wanted to get to the offense. So you mentioned promotions, investing, and side income. What do you think delivers the biggest payoff for single women?
That's A great question, a tough question. I'm going to jump to promotions just because I think it opens up the other doors.
Okay.
And I really do think overall, in order to get those promotions, it's women really, seizing control, taking the steering wheel on their career and their finances, and being very intentional about the way that they're building their careers. And to keep in mind that your network is your net worth. Your insulation for the job loss or anything else is having that really strong professional community around you. And the sooner you start building it, just like investing, the stronger it'll be when you need it. So I would say that if you're going to choose one lever to focus on, I would choose the career advancement lever.
Okay, perfect. Sasha, what are your thoughts on that?
Investing wisely. I have spoken to a lot of younger women, and they are in your traditional 60-40 portfolio. That says that's a portfolio that's probably more suitable for someone who is nearing retirement or a little bit older. I think if we can use the power of more equity and stocks in our portfolio when we're younger, but part of that is really educating ourselves and being comfortable with volatility. But if you are able to do that, and I think working with a professional can get you there, you're really able to generate higher rates of return over the long run and really benefit from compounding.
Okay. And Jessica, what do you think?
I don't know if I can add anything. Those are some really, really great points, and I completely agree. One of the things I look back on as a regret is not really fighting for higher income, promotions, switching jobs when there was a stagnation there. The best thing that I ever did was leave my last job to work for myself because there's, kind of no ceiling in terms of my growth potential. And so I think sometimes it's just about taking a look at what's going on in your life right now, what's working, what's not, and, having a plan for, okay, maybe I do need to leave jobs, but I want to do it in the most, safe way possible. So taking a look, make sure I have that emergency fund. I've got that network I can kind of lean on. I've got an action plan so I can do that. And especially the investing component, if I could go back in time, I would do things so differently. I didn't really pay attention to what was going on with my investments until my late 20s. And that's years of compounding that, I could have really taken advantage of now. And so I guess the other thing that was already pointed out, but I just want to say it once again, is the best thing that you can do right now is to start right now on the things that you've been putting on the back burner, because they're important, but you'll get to them later. Summer, I personally think, is a great time to do an inventory of your finances when it's maybe a little bit slower in your life, and work and take a look at some of these blind spots, these areas that really need your attention.
Okay, awesome. So we have a few minutes left, and I just wanted to dive into investing a little bit more, which I think in general, but particularly for women, is always treated as personal finance plus.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, oh, the thing that's like really advanced, when in fact, I feel very strongly that it's just like, it's the basics. You need to know how to invest, or you're not going to be okay financially. So Sasha, and then let's go to Sasha, Jessica, and Amal. I don't know if this is a question you can address, but let me know. Sasha and Jessica, I wanted to ask you, what are some of maybe the common biases that you come across, either from the industry or sort of the internalized biases that you come across, that women have internalized when it comes to women investing?
So I mentioned the first one, overly conservative portfolios. And then it's the second point I made was about cash, right? But the third one is, and this is not just women, this is just as investors in Canada in general, we tend to have a heavy domestic bias, meaning that we tend to allocate too much of our portfolio to Canadian stocks or Canadian investments. So the number one rule in investing is diversify. That's the only free lunch in investing, and we need to do better at doing that. We need to get comfortable with being able to allocate parts of our portfolio to different geographies geographic regions. And it's really easy to do now in today's world with things like ETFs. You don't have to know exactly what stock to buy. You can buy broad passive exposure to different regions, different types of sectors. It's not overly difficult. But I do think working with a professional can help you navigate the investment landscape a lot easier and get very comfortable with volatility in your portfolio, because the number one mistake most investors do is selling at the absolute worst time and buying at the absolute worst time. So, when people are running when everyone's selling, that's when you want to be buying, right? So working with a professional can really help you develop that mindset, and that really accelerates your overall growth potential.
Mm-hmm.
And Jessica?
I'd like to add the one thing that I hear so often, especially from women who know they need to invest, but they don't know, where to start, is where do I start and how do I do it? I know we talk a lot about, working with a professional. Some women may not feel comfortable, or they may not have the portfolio, because some professionals will only work with you if you have $500,000, or, they don't want to go to the bank and just buy mutual funds. And so that's a big reason why 4 years ago I launched my own investing course to teach women, everyone actually, but still it's like 90% students, women students in my course, about the basics, and also then getting deep into certain topics, so we can start right at the foundational level of talking about, what's the difference between equities and fixed income, and just building on that. So at the end, you eventually understand what makes a good diversified portfolio, why are keeping fees low so important to your financial future, how it can save you thousands and thousands of dollars. How investing can be as simple as you want it. I mean, a lot of the time for beginner investors, I think using a robo-advisor is such a great way to get started. Very easy, very cheap. You're buying just index ETFs, pre-built portfolio. It's all done for you. Or, it's very easy to learn how to do it on your own, DIY, opening up a discount brokerage, buying your own ETFs, or an asset allocation ETF. There's so many different avenues that I think often, even though the information is out there, there's so many opinions and so much information, it can be, again, overwhelming and hard to really know what to listen to and maybe what isn't some good advice. So I always like to kind of tell people, there's a lot of great options out there that are really easy to get started, and here's what they look like. And the best thing that you can do if you feel overwhelmed, and I refer back to my 20s, I was just that person, really scared to move away from my advisor and look for alternatives, is to start educating yourself. There's some really great books out there. Erica, I know you've got a really great book as well. It's a really great book for beginners. And, start educating yourself so you understand the terminology and the things you need to know. And then what you'll realize at the end of it is this stuff isn't that hard.
Totally agree. Amal, did you want to jump in?
I'll just echo, it's not hard. It's just historically been inaccessible, because books like Erica's and Jessica's, until recently haven't been available. It's a lot of language that is more technical than it needs to be, and it's a culture that's a lot more bro-y than it needs to be. But there are amazing advisors like Sasha that you can seek out. And trust me, if the guys can figure it out, like, you could figure it out. You're good.
Fantastic. That's a perfect note on which to wrap up this conversation. So we're going to get to the audience questions, but before we dive into that, please everyone take a moment to check your inbox. We'll be sending out a survey regarding our discussion, and we'd really appreciate it if you could take a minute to complete it. And now, let's see what some of your questions are. So here's one. It says, what are the key financial challenges that single seniors encounter, and what strategies can help individuals prepare for financial stability as they age later in life? And I'm going to throw that to Sasha first, because I know that came up in conversations that we've had in preparation for this event.
Yeah, I think the biggest, they underestimate healthcare costs. And then we underestimate how long we're going to live and where we might have to live. Those long-term care facilities are extremely expensive. And we really have to think a lot about how much we save for retirement. So when I'm talking with clients, most clients think about when they first retire and how much they're going to spend when they first retire. And that usually is, a lot of travel and all the fun things that they want to do. And then they think, okay, I won't spend as much later on because I won't be able to travel as much. But they forget that they'll have healthcare costs to deal with. They forget that they might have to go into a long-term care facility. And so I think in ensuring that when you are doing your financial plan and you're looking at projections, that you take into consideration what those costs will be as you continue to live, because we're living a lot longer. And we're going to continue to do that, and that's great, but we have to be prepared for it.
Okay, perfect. And then we have sort of another question at the opposite end of the demographic spread. And I was going to put that to Amal. And so this is, what advice would you offer to a recent single graduate navigating the challenges of job hunting in an unstable job market, especially with the goal of establishing financial independence?
I'd say to keep it really simple is be really active in reaching out to people on LinkedIn and building your network, because I'm on the other side of the invitations or the requests for coffee chats, and I still get a lot more from men than from women, and our entire business is for women. So I just say, take the reins and do not hesitate to reach out. Do not be intimidated by titles. A lot of people are generous and want to help you. And also, don't just stick to reaching out to more senior women because it feels more comfortable to talk to a woman. We know most job referrals, men tend to refer men, women tend to refer women. But if men are in most of those roles, if you just look at the numbers, that will box you out. So, step into the discomfort, reach out, and make sure you're reaching out to both men and women to build your network.
Okay. Can I ask a quick follow-up question there? I find this is I guess, a personal question. So I find as, someone who's mid-career now, it's so easy for me to ask people out for coffee. I know what to ask. I'm well established in my career, lots to chat about. But when you're a student, I found it really daunting to ask people out for coffee. And then I would always think but what are we going to talk about? So how would you tackle that?
That's such a great point. I remember that. I remember it felt just so scary and why would they want to talk to me? However, I think you actually have an advantage at that age, because a lot of people, if you're a bright-eyed, really enthusiastic young person, you have big dreams, and you're sitting there and you're asking them questions, you're curious, because guess what? In these coffee chats, you don't have to worry about what you're going to be saying, because you're really there to listen, to ask them really great questions, learn from them, learn from their experiences. And most people who are more advanced in their careers, and Erica, I think you could probably echo this and the others on this panel, if you get a really ambitious young person who's trying really hard and they just want to learn from you, that's pretty hard to turn down.
That's very, very, very true. We have another question. I'm going to throw that to Jessica. So the question is, what would you say to women who don't currently have a financial planner or feel as though their current financial plan isn't working?
When I started out, I didn't have a financial planner. It's only in my 30s that I started working with one. There's so many great resources and books and podcasts and things that you can tap into to learn what does it mean to have a financial plan. Because the one thing I often hear from people is they, work with an advisor or a planner, but they have no idea what they're talking about. And so you do need to kind of arm yourself with that financial literacy if you don't have it. And again, understand the terms that they're talking about. I do that all the time now, which I try not to, but I use, terminology that you may not know what it means, like asset allocation ETF. What the heck is that? And so it's really important to educate yourself and take, we're online all the time. Most of the time we're just scrolling social media and it's just garbage. And so take a little bit of time, just to 20 minutes a day, just to learn something that you don't know so you can build that confidence. So if you do choose to work with a planner, planner, you're getting the most out of it. You know exactly what to ask them. You know what questions to ask if you need some more information or you don't understand what they're saying. And you can very clearly see if they're doing the job that you want to. Like, I hear from so many women saying, I got a financial planner or work with an advisor, but I don't think I got anything out of it. What a waste of time and money. And so you can really arm yourself with a lot of that information ahead of time before spending any money with a planner, so you get the most value. And I think that's something that's, so easy to implement, but you just have to do it.
Erica, I know we have like seconds left. I just want to add something really quickly to that. If you're working with a financial planner, they should be able to do projections for you. So they should be able to actually put in what you're making, how much you want to spend, what you want to spend money on, and they should be able to project out for you throughout your entire life what things look like, and they should be updating that for you every single time something in your life changes. So that's how you know that you're working with an actual planner and not someone who says they're planning.
I guess the other thing is make sure you understand what their background and credentials are, because they're not all the same.
Absolutely. Okay, we'll have to leave it here today. So on behalf of the Globe and Mail, I would like to thank you, Sasha, Amal, and Jessica. It's been great having you here today. And I wanted to also a special thank you to our sponsor, Richardson Wealth, for making today's event possible. And of course, a big thank you to all of you in the audience for tuning in. We'll display a QR code on the screen, allowing you to complete the survey. A link to the recorded webcast will be sent to all registered participants within the next 2 weeks. And if I can add one tiny little thing, the Globe has a great personal finance team. We have Rob Carrick, one of the best known personal finance experts, writing a newsletter that is free, and our team is expanding. And out of 5 reporters, now 3 of us are women. So that's an easy place to start if you don't know where to start. Thank you again, and enjoy your day.